Birth Association and indiebirth.com. No material on this podcast should be considered medical advice. Birth is not a medical event.
Welcome to Indie Birth's Taking Birth Back series of podcasts here on iTunes. Today's podcast is about nutrition. One word, seems simple, should be relatively simple, so let's see how it goes. Nutrition in pregnancy. The best prenatal care, really, is nutrition. Feeding your body when you're pregnant. Absolute best thing you can do for yourself and for your baby. Nutrition is definitely the one single thing that most midwives at least agree upon and acknowledge that will affect the pregnancy and the birth outcome, as well as the postpartum period. So it's been proven that good nutrition can prevent complications in pregnancy, preterm birth, premature rupture of membranes, waters opening before birth, before it's time, low birth weight, and preeclampsia. Those four in particular. Some women, of course, may develop them regardless, because there's certainly other factors involved, but nutrition is still the best defense that we know about. So, good nutrition, what is that? It's optimal health for us and our babies. Might mean something slightly different for everybody, but I'm hoping today to kind of give you a general sense about what I think good nutrition is, based on what I've learned and seen over the years, both with other women and myself. I think there's a lot to think about. As simple as it sounds, what we put in our mouths, how this literally forms the cells of our babies and allows our babies to grow and thrive. But there's so much we don't know about the way prenatal nutrition affects us, really, and our baby's long-term health, as that baby becomes an adult, and as that baby begins to have children. So that's the really big picture, that we think about nutrition to not, have any complications during pregnancy and birth, but also for the bigger picture, because we're affecting generations to come, literally, with what we put in our mouth and how we treat our bodies. So, what is good nutrition? What does that mean? It means something slightly different to everybody, like I've said, perhaps. So I'll give you my spiel, and you can decide what you think and how it fits into your life and what you think and what you've learned. Why is good nutrition important? Talked a little bit already about why it would be important. So this is a pretty basic talk. There are literally books upon books about prenatal nutrition, about nutrition in general. So trying to make it simple today, since this is a podcast and hopefully something that you can listen to easily without investing tons of time. I want to talk about some basic concepts that I think women with any diet type can implement. At least I hope so. I admittedly am a carnivore and omnivore. I eat pretty much everything at this point in my life as far as food groups. However, I've had personally a vegetarian pregnancy. That was my second. And of course, I've helped women of all food types. So vegetarians, vegans, raw foodists, women that stick to the paleo or grain-free diet. So I'm not an expert in all of those things for sure, but I'm hoping that the tips given today you can apply to your own life. So the first thing is that I think eating in pregnancy is a different animal than eating when we're not pregnant. And again, I think we're all different enough, just in the way our bodies are made or our lifestyle. We may or may not recognize the difference. pre-pregnancy and during pregnancy, some of us may really feel the difference just in the amount of food or type of food we're able to eat. But I would argue that it is definitely different, even if it's not something you're feeling a whole lot, at least at the beginning, simply because the process is different. I mean, obviously, as full-grown adults, we just don't require the same amount of food, perhaps, and definitely not the same vitamin and mineral requirements that we do when we're building a person cell by cell and building their brain and, giving them fat and muscles. So probably goes without saying, but it is a different animal. So if you haven't thought about that, and I know some women don't, they just assume they're going to continue on. And they may be able to continue on depending on how well they were eating before pregnancy. But I think just tucking it away in your brain that it is different and to be open to your body asking for different requirements along the way is, a possibility. So why do we want to supply our bodies with the best possible nutrition in pregnancy? Now, we said already that good nutrition is the one single thing that we know, at least as midwives, we know that this affects pregnancy. We know that it prevents complications. But why is this? It's a very simple reason. Our bodies, when pregnant, at about 8 weeks of pregnancy, start to slowly build up our blood supply, our blood volume. So by the time we're about 28 to 32 weeks pregnant, we've pretty much doubled our blood volume. So 50 to some say 60% more blood flowing through your veins than when you weren't pregnant. Now, how amazing is that? Right? Because we need that extra blood. We need it. Obviously, there's a growing person, and almost more importantly, there's a placenta that needs this blood supply so that it can in turn supply the baby. So the growing placenta needs the blood, the baby needs the blood. Your body is working slightly differently, the way your organs need to function in pregnancy. And your body is needing to be maintained. So your organs, for example, your liver and your kidneys, definitely, for sure, take on an extra load in pregnancy. It's just a fact. The kidneys have to work extra hard to filter the baby as well as yourself. And the liver is working extra hard to do the same kind of detox job that it always does. But it needs an extra blood supply to do this. It can't just keep going with the same amount of blood you had before. And again, if it were to keep going with that minimal blood supply, that's when you would start to see problems in most cases. That's when you would start to see complications like preterm birth maybe, or preeclampsia, simply because the body is overwhelmed with the job it has to do and the lack of resources it has to do it with. So, the expanding of the blood volume is very much a key concept. And if you've heard of the Brewer diet definitely focuses the whole entire pregnancy diet on this concept. So it's definitely not something I've come up with. It's definitely not something super new, but it's something that most women don't seem to know about. And I think it's important, not just from sort of a scientific point of view, because understanding it, gives you the resources to know what's going on with your body. But I think it can give us confidence, that if we're able to supply our body with this extra blood supply, and the way we do that, when we'll get to it in more detail, is through food, is through nutrients. And when we're able to supply our body with that, we should be pretty well assured that we will have smooth, healthy pregnancies. That's the general idea. So we want this extra blood supply so that our body can work well on every level. Placenta, baby, everybody's happy and taken care of. We can avoid pregnancy complications this way, and we're going to feel good. I've, talked to women and walked with women that did not accomplish this blood supply expansion for one reason or another, and in most cases, they just really don't feel good towards the middle of pregnancy. And that's a time when you should really, feel great, and the baby's growing at a good rate. The blood volume expansion as well helps with, having a normal functional labor. Why? Because it's like an athlete preparing for a race. You've done the training and your body is prepped. Same with labor. When you've built up this extra blood supply and everything your body needs is there, then ideally you're able to go through labor normally. Your body isn't struggling. It can handle it. The mom can handle it and the baby can handle it. And the baby comes at full term when the baby's ready and not preterm. And the baby is healthy and, appropriate size for the mom. These are all bonuses, benefits, reasons to think about nutrition and expand that blood volume. Another reason is being able to lose some blood at birth. I think bleeding at birth is probably on the top 3 fears of most women, hospital birth or home birth even. And losing a little blood at birth can and is certainly normal, but building up your blood supply allows you to, lose some and not be in the negative. Let's put it that way. So that's another bonus. And, not losing too much blood at birth means you feel good after birth. You don't feel run down and weak, and you're able to take care of your newborn and nurse your newborn. And that is a final benefit, is that building up your blood volume in pregnancy means that you're usually pretty successful with breastfeeding because you've built up your fat supply. And we need fat. We need fat in pregnancy, and we need fat to make milk and support a newborn. Plus, having a newborn can just be a challenge in many ways, emotionally and mentally, and feeling good physically only makes it that much easier. So there are many ways to get to the goal of blood volume expansion in the sense of us all being individuals and requiring certain different things, but it comes down to doing this through our food. It depends on the source that you look at, and there are many out there, but mainstream source, the American Pregnancy Association, says you need about 200 to 300 extra calories a day. It's possible for some. For some of us, we need a lot more. I don't tend to think about, for me, extra calories per day, because it's not something I focus on in my normal life, calories that is. So I prefer thinking about overall calories when pregnant, a la the Brewer diet, which we'll talk more about in a minute. And he says about 2,700 a day. So we'll talk more about that. But my point is, depending on the source, you're going to read lots of different things about what's the requirement for pregnancy. And I feel like in the more mainstream sources, where no one's really talking about the Brewer diet or blood volume expansion, there tends to be this feeling of restriction in the sense of we don't want women to gain too much. And to me, that's the general medical opinion about weight gain during pregnancy, is there's not a focus on quality and nutrient-dense foods. There's this very narrow focus on not too much weight gain, because they I think that means a overly large baby or something. Instead, I ask you to, certainly check out those sources, make your own choices, but to consider focusing on quality, what goes in your mouth, and how good it is for you, rather than a number on the scale, which is easier said than done. I mean, for myself as well, I think many of us as pregnant women can get carried away with, thinking about a number or what we wind up post-pregnancy or how we'll lose it, and all these food and weight issues that we have the potential to carry. But in an ideal world, eat for your baby, eat for your health during pregnancy, and don't concern yourself with weight gain, because we're all different. And some of us will gain a whole lot eating well, and some of us won't. And the point is eating well. I don't think we should be overly focused on weight gain, but again, quality. Okay, so into some of the nitty-gritty. What are some basic concepts of what I consider good nutrition? Now, we talked about expanding the blood volume, which is very much a brewer diet concept. And I do appreciate the brewer diet, so you'll hear me mention it, probably a handful more times. And I think it's, got a lot of good in it. And my intent isn't to redo that or to take credit for it at all. However, I'm definitely going to add some of my own opinion into what I'm about to tell you because it's, things I've learned and things I feel work well. So it's kind of a little combo of what I think makes up good nutrition. So when I'm trying to break it down for somebody simply as possible, I say it's about quality of our food. So whole foods, meaning things that come from the ground, from the earth, from an animal. And it's that old, perimeter of the grocery store idea. Not going for a whole lot of foods in the aisles, because that stuff is boxed and bagged and canned and frozen. We stay on the perimeter in most cases. We've got whole foods. So, reading labels is important, and if you're buying whole foods, there aren't too many ingredients, usually. Maybe just a couple. Usually just one. But if you're venturing into other items in the store, then you're going to want to read labels, and less is definitely more. So anything with artificial color, yellow number 5, hydrogenated oils, anything unpronounceable is best left behind, especially in pregnancy, as best you can. So when we're talking about quality, organic, the label organic, definitely comes into the conversation. Products labeled organic don't necessarily mean healthy. You can see that if you go into the store and there are organic, cheese puffs and cookies, that kind of thing. Although they may be made of better ingredients than the conventional equivalents. Organic is also, potentially, in most cases, a label that can be bought if you're a farmer or a manufacturer of food that you apply to the government for. Meaning that you promise not to use pesticides or toxins when growing your food. So, it's a pretty good qualification, but it's not across the board perfect. In fact, many local farmers or local purveyors of, local food may not be able to afford the label organic. So, while it is something to look for, it may not apply in certain cases. And again, with local produce in particular, it may not be organic, but you can ask for sure about their growing methods and whether or not they use pesticides, antibiotics, chemicals, that kind of thing. But for simple purposes, of course, organic does imply higher quality in the sense of leaving the pesticides behind. So especially when it comes to fruit and vegetables, it's a good way to go. If cost is an issue, organics are at least slightly more expensive than conventional produce. You can buy conventional produce and wash it or buy a pesticide removing type cleaner. Some people only buy organics for certain types of produce. There's a list somewhere, probably on the internet, about the products that you definitely want to buy organic. So leafed lettuces and apples and tomatoes for sure. And then the items with thicker skins like bananas or avocados, although preferable to have them be organic, they're sort of lower down on the totem pole, I guess, of pesticides being able to get into the produce. So you do the best you can with that, knowing that the best quality foods are without any chemicals when possible. Also, part of that discussion is the discussion about GMO products and produce. So that's genetically modified organisms. And you could read about this online for a long time, so I won't pretend to be an expert on it. But GMOs are being added to our food sources sometimes, and a lot of the times, without us even knowing. And I think most would agree that they're definitely dangerous. And we don't have enough evidence at this point with research to say how they might affect a pregnancy or a placenta or a baby or a birth. But a lot of people are guessing that there will be evidence at some point, and even if there wasn't, that they're still pretty dangerous and that it's best to stay away from GMOs at all costs, really. So the thing about GMO products is that sometimes, and I find this to be confusing in a way, organic products can still have GMOs. So when you're reading labels or asking about produce or talking to a farmer, GMO is kind of separate from being organic or not. So you want to look at the label and make sure it says non-GMO, even if it is, especially a box of cookies or crackers, because it seems that GMOs are really prevalent in the grain products, so corn and wheat in particular. So that's something to look out for. And there are quite a bit of resources online as well that list GMO products, like brand names, so that if you're questioning it, you can't find whether it's GMO or not. When you're looking at it in the store, you can certainly go online and almost always locate it and find out. And the truth is, if the label isn't saying non-GMO, well, chances are it probably does contain GMOs. But if you want to be sure, you can go look that up and just try and stay away from all of the toxins and pesticides in foods whenever possible. So that's the thing about quality for sure. The other thing about organics is that, potentially, allegedly, they have a wider range of nutrients. As you can notice with fruits and vegetables in general, greater spectrum of colors. So more colors, naturally occurring, of course, mean more vitamins and minerals. So that's a great thing. So quality. We've spoken a little bit about quality being really important. What about quantity? I find this to be rather relevant with the women that I work with, and for myself even at times, that the quality can be really great, and that's a wonderful thing to have access to good food, but sometimes the quantity is not enough. And as great as your food may be, if the calories just aren't there, and it's not enough for your body to do the job of growing a baby and a placenta and an extra blood supply, then it's not good enough. So we need quality and we need quantity. As far as quantity, how many calories a day? Again, as I said, I like to think that Dr. Brewer was pretty close with his average, which was about 2,700 calories a day for the average woman. And we have to remember that any number, pretty much, that we're given in pregnancy for just about anything is an average, and we may require more or less. So what number pregnancy is this for you? If you've had a bunch, especially close together, then your body may be more depleted and you may need more calories. It's just something to keep in mind. If you are nursing another baby or a toddler, you may need more calories. If you're really active, whether that's, you're gardening all day or you're exercising strenuously or not, or you're chasing your kids around, that may play into how many calories you need. And stress level. And stress can be emotional and mental stress. It can be physical stress. Some people have jobs where they stand up all day or work all night, and that definitely adds stress to the body. And the body, therefore, needs more calories in pregnancy to get the job done. So, the reason calories are so important is that the placenta uses them. I think we think the obvious, which is probably also true, that the extra calories are just needed to grow a baby because the baby is, extra. But the placenta is just as, if not more important than that, because the placenta is responsible for feeding the baby and keeping the baby alive and allowing the baby to grow at an appropriate rate in a healthy way. So restricting calories, whether someone does that intentionally or not, means that the placenta gets less blood supply. And generally speaking, this means a smaller placenta that functions less optimally. So really, just think about it. The blood, in the placenta and going through the umbilical cord to the baby, whose entire lifeline depends on that blood supply. We want a good blood supply. And we want the placenta to be a good, healthy size so that the blood supply is optimum. So calories are really important. And for women that, may be restricting calories because someone told them to, or maybe they started pregnancy overweight and they think that gives them permission to restrict calories during pregnancy, we need to tell them, and they need to know that they still need calories. Whether or not it's 2,700 a day is up for discussion, depending on their needs. But calories are needed. We cannot skimp on calories during pregnancy. However, there needs to be a balance of protein and calories. So that means you can't have one without the other. And most of the time, it's pretty simple to do if you are, in fact, getting protein to get calories. Most protein-rich foods, such as dairy, meats, those kind of things, also are pretty high in calories. So what this is really referring to is no protein supplements. And that's really important to point out, especially when we're mentioning the Brewer diet, because the Brewer diet, I believe, is fabulous. However, the bad reputation that it may have gotten along the years is a miscommunication about the need for protein. Now, the Brewer diet calls for 75 to 100 grams of protein a day. However, he meant whole food protein, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But he did not mean protein supplements. So this unbalanced protein, because it is unbalanced when it comes from, say, a soy powder or some kind of bar, it's unbalanced because it does not have the calories and fat that would normally accompany sort of a typical source of protein, like a piece of meat. So unbalanced protein, has been shown in studies to contribute to poor outcomes. So there's actually a higher rate of pregnancy complications in women that supplement protein with non-food sources or manufactured sort of sources. However, on a positive note, the balance of protein and calories, which again is ideal, and that would come from real food sources, those studies have shown a reduced risk for small to date babies, a reduced stillbirth rate, and neonatal death rate. So we have some pretty concrete proof that real food contributes to better outcomes. And again, it's really important to mention that even among the very healthy, educated women that I had the privilege of working with, there's not always that understanding. So when we're talking about 75 to 100 grams of protein, many women without the information will say, oh, well, I had a protein bar, or, oh, I have this protein mix. And that is not what we're talking about. Not that you can't do that occasionally, but it's just not an appropriate source of protein for pregnancy. So, on to protein. Again, Dr. Brewer stressed the protein, and again, that's been blown out of proportion, depending on what you read. But really, I think he had it right. I think 75 to 100 grams average is appropriate. And again, that can mean 60 for some women. That can mean over 100 for other women. But the protein is what's growing the baby, essentially, and also expanding the blood supply. So in balance with calories, this is optimum. This is optimum health. Now, the protein sources can be varied, of course, depending on your diet. If we're talking about quality and we're talking about meat eating people, then organic again is great and preferable. Grass-fed is even better because we have the balance of omega fatty acids there. And pastured, if it's chicken. So to know what the chicken are eating, and hopefully it's not antibiotics and grains. So we can get pretty picky with our meat. And that means asking questions, finding out the source, talking to the farmers, sometimes looking long and hard in your community for really great sources of meat that you feel that you can trust and that are the best for your family. The same goes for fish, which is another good source of protein. Canned tuna, not so much. We do have to be aware of mercury levels in the bigger fish. And unless, you're able to buy the cans of tuna that maybe Whole Foods has, or those kind of specialty stores where you can kind of be assured, at least by the label, that the mercury content is low to nothing, then I would say maybe that's not the best choice, unfortunately, in this day and age. Dairy, of course, is a great source of protein. And for me, in my community, in my family, raw dairy is a very important part. And not everybody knows a lot about raw dairy. Not everybody, it kind of accepts the concept. But the basic concept is that all the good bacteria are left in. It's not heated and homogenized to destroy all the good stuff. I guess the detractors from raw dairy would say there's the potential of bacteria, but I feel like that's something we all need to consider at our own risk. And again, that would be finding out the source, talking to the farm, seeing what their methods are as far as cleanliness with, say, raw milk. But if you have any sensitivity to dairy, it's worth trying. It's worth trying raw dairy because many people that are sensitive can tolerate raw dairy. And especially in pregnancy, it can just be easier on the stomach. Full fat dairy, of course. So if you're going to do yogurt, hopefully cottage cheese, sour cream, that not only is it organic, but it is full fat. No skimping on the fat in pregnancy. For our vegetarian friends and vegan friends, of course, there are plenty of plant sources of protein, beans, lentils, quinoa, chia seeds, nuts, all kinds of combination of those things. So, what your source is obviously depends on what your diet is. And then if you need to kind of get started, you'll have to just look at serving size and how much protein per portion, kind of get a sense of how much protein you're getting in a day, and assess from there as far as if you need more or less, dependent on Dr. Brewer's recommendations and your own needs and how you feel and that kind of thing. Eggs, of course, are another good source of protein. And there's probably a million more. I'm sort of trying to hit the absolute basics here and just explain why each category is important. Can't possibly talk about every food in every category. So as mentioned, let's say a little bit more about good fats, essential to building the baby's brain. Essential. And that is one of the key points that I've seen be radically different in pregnancy. So what I mean by that is people think, oh, I don't need to eat that different in pregnancy. I already eat great, or I already eat enough. But something for many women that needs to change is this way of eating low calorie, low fat, low fat and dairy foods. Now, that may or may not be the choice you want to make when you're not pregnant, but I just want to give you the information that full fat is appropriate for pregnancy. Your baby's brain relies on it, so please don't skimp. No 2% milk, no low-fat cheese. Go for the full fat. Enjoy it. Use lots of butter. Add cream to your milk. Add cream to whatever you can. The calories are really important, and that's, of course, if you do dairy. If you don't do dairy, or even if you do, the other sources of good fats would be avocados, nuts, nut butter, coconut oil, lots of oils, really. And you can use those things just in cooking, as salad dressings, on vegetables. So you get creative when you're pregnant, for sure, if you haven't already. And when you're really trying to make the most of every bite you put in your mouth, you find there's all kinds of combinations and ways to go to add these things to your diet. I think that's really important. So the next category would be carbohydrates, and that, of course, as we know, used for energy, but also the growing of the placenta and just general expanding your blood volume. Now, carbs, of course, can come in the form of whole grains. So if you're going to do grains as your source of carbs, then let's make sure they're whole grain. So you usually would want to check the label for that. But then there's also just whole grain sources such as quinoa and rice and lentils. Soaked and sprouted grains are allegedly healthier, at least better for your digestion. So you can soak and sprout your own grains and nuts and seeds, or you can buy them that way. Usually pretty expensive, but they do make sprouted breads. So if you're going to do grains, that's a great idea. And if you're not going to do grains, because some people don't in pregnancy and otherwise, then you obviously just sort of want to bulk up on the fresh vegetables and maybe more root vegetables if that appeals to you and feels good on your body. So sweet potatoes and potatoes, and quinoa is technically not a grain, it's a seed. So it's all about balance, but it's about just being aware, of course, of what's needed. A really important category, I think, and this is something that I don't see being talked about with the brewer diet, is the category of fermented foods and good bacteria in your diet. Now, the truth is, you can also take a probiotic, which is just a pill or a powder, but there are so many benefits to having the bacteria in your food and to having these things at every meal, or at least a couple times a day. So you can read about the benefits of fermented foods if you're not familiar. The easiest example would be a whole milk plain yogurt. They even make cultured, which is sort of another way of saying fermented, cultured sour cream and cottage cheese. Now, lots of things sort of that weren't cultured, you can now get cultured. Kombucha is a popular beverage, and that is fermented. Plain old vegetables can be fermented, such as sauerkraut, and you can make your own of those sorts of things pretty easy and buy them pretty easily. So the reason it's so important is maybe obvious. In pregnancy, and even when not, keeping your gut flora in order is very helpful. In pregnancy, it's going to be helpful so that your digestive system is operating properly and easily, because things can sort of make a change, and really help immunity. So even if you're just taking probiotics, it can really help immunity, especially through a winter when everybody's exposed to germs and getting sick. And thanks to the amazing midwife, Gail Hart, who I must give credit to, we must consider how great things like yogurt are and other fermented foods are for our vaginal health, which is very important during pregnancy for obvious reasons. The most obvious being, the baby coming through for a vaginal birth, but also during pregnancy, just because we can be more susceptible to infections such as yeast or bacterial vaginosis simply because of a change of pH and bacteria that, in her words, we like to have floriculture. So she explains it in the way of seeding your garden, your vegetable garden outside with good stuff in the soil to make the vegetables grow, that we want to do the same thing vaginally. And we can do that really pretty simply with food. Again, even if it's just plain yogurt and not yogurt with, the fruit added. That's not what I'm talking about. Plain yogurt or kefir, which is, a yogurt, fermented kind of yogurt beverage. I'm not an expert on fermented foods. I sort of have the ones that I do. But if you were interested, there's all kinds of books and people out there that know how to ferment just about everything and make all kinds of, water, kefir, and different things. So it's definitely a cool project. And even, if you only buy them at the store, that's okay. But the reasoning, I think, is sound. And I think it's a very important part of good pregnancy nutrition that most often gets overlooked. And I don't know if that's because in some circles, fermented foods are just, people don't know about them, or maybe they think they're gross. I don't know. But even if you don't know anything, it's something new to learn, something new to try, and you may really like them. And again, if worse comes to worse and you just really don't, probiotics are the supplemental way of getting those things, at least in your gut. So, we've covered a bunch. I have a few more things to add. How about sea salt? Sea salt is super important during pregnancy. In fact, I could probably do a whole podcast on sea salt. But let's keep it brief for today. That sea salt is not iodized salt. So check your labels, look what you're buying at the store. You want real sea salt, which can be trickier to find. And in my conventional grocery store here, they really don't sell a good sea salt. It's labeled sea salt, but I can tell it's very processed and it's bleached. And ideally, that's not what you're looking for. It's not a whole lot better than iodized, except for the fact that iodine has been left out. So if you can go into a natural store, or Whole Foods or whatever, you're sort of looking for the most mineral dense, most raw. There's a pink salt that's really great. And you can do your research ahead of time. So you want the salt that has sort of been the least processed, the most from the sea that you can possibly get. And the reason is that this salt has minerals from the earth. Iodized salt is not. Everything has been taken out and bleached, and the minerals are just not there. The reason you want the minerals is so that your system, your blood, your circulatory system, your cardiovascular system can function optimally. And fluids are really important in pregnancy, right? And we've already talked about quality, but the minerals are needed. And sure, you're getting minerals from the good food that you're eating, but they need to be in balance and circulating in your system so that your body can actually absorb them and use the good food that you're eating. In addition, and again, this could be a whole nother podcast, real sea salt is going to keep you from swelling in at least a pathological way, meaning a bad way. Some will say that adding good sea salt to your diet consistently will mean that, you may avoid preeclampsia and other kinds of issues because it helps the blood volume expand by the way it attracts fluids in your body. So it's not at all what you'll read in a traditional mainstream pregnancy diet book, which is to keep off the salt. If you're swelling, lay off the salt. And they're right in the sense of that being table salt. Again, the iodized salt or the many forms of salt that exist. Monosodium glutamate, MSG, that's a form of salt. Yes, we want to limit those kinds of salts. The salts in processed hot dogs and lunch meats with nitrates. We want to limit that kind of salt. Again, I can't stress enough that that is not sea salt. Sea salt is good, and you must go to an extent to find a good source, and then you want to be adding that to your food. You want to be. In fact, Dr. Brewer did do a study in his time where he fed the same woman the same meal at different points in her pregnancy, and as she became more pregnant, she automatically would add more salt to her meal. So it does help with the blood volume expansion, and it's considered an essential part of good pregnancy nutrition. Some other minor points, sort of minor. For most of us, it's eating, snacking, taking a few bites of food every, couple hours, really. That going 6 to 8 hours, like we may have done when we were pregnant, is just usually not going to work anymore. Now, for some it might, especially overnight. I've met many women who didn't feel the need to eat overnight. Well, not going to force anybody to eat overnight. I am not one of them, at least when I get later in pregnancy. I can't go 8 hours at night. And if I do, I just simply don't sleep. It's not necessarily that I feel hungry, it's just I can't get to sleep. So eating every 2 hours is optimum in the sense of keeping your blood sugar stable, no huge lows, and kind of just keeping you level. I mean, when the baby's really growing, I feel like having something every couple hours is kind in the sense of the baby getting fed too. So I feel like going 6 to 8 hours is just too much in most cases. And if that woman were to start eating every 2 hours, she would feel better. And she may not even notice that she didn't feel great. But once she starts eating every 2 hours, her appetite may increase and she just may have more energy. So it's something to try. It's a pretty low risk thing to try. And always including protein. So again, not protein supplements, but maybe a handful of nuts. We're not talking a lot of food here every 2 hours. Just a handful. A chunk of cheese, some apple, that kind of thing. Not a meal, necessarily. Limiting sugar, to me, is part of good nutrition. And it's not that we can't have treats. So I think that this gets hard because women want to be as perfect as they can in pregnancy. And the truth is, no one's perfect. And we all have things we eat we shouldn't, possibly. And sometimes it's hard to be honest about them. So you only need to be honest with yourself. And a lot of women have a true sugar addiction, especially during pregnancy. There can be a couple reasons for this. Two of the most popular reasons, I suppose, are need for more protein. So really craving sugar can mean you're just not getting the protein in your diet. And or it can mean you're just not getting enough fluids. So you're dehydrated and you start craving things like sugars in fruit, for example. It's probably really the fluid you're craving. Again, we do the best we can. And my rule, at least for myself, is if I really feel like I need a treat of some kind, so say ice cream, brownie, that kind of thing, that I try to make it homemade. So ice cream, for example, even if you're non-dairy, you can use coconut milk. That's a great, very rich in calorie and fat treat. So we can use really good ingredients and simple ingredients to make the treats that we want. And balancing them with protein is also great. So the ice cream example, make homemade ice cream, or you can buy, for sure, really high quality, and coconut milk ice cream is one of my favorites. So I'm not non-dairy, but I love coconut ice cream, and they make a really great organic one. And I can add some nuts to it, or fruit, or both, and feel just a little bit more balanced. So it's not that we can never have treats. It's just, let's make the most of what we put in our mouths. And let's recognize that too much sugar over the course of a day, and again, that can come in the form of fruits even, too much sugar is taking away from more valuable things we could put in our mouths. And the truth is, too much sugar, and this is more someone binging maybe on a bag of candy, say at Halloween, or whatever, take your pick, this really is dangerous for the baby. It's not just sugar is bad because it rots your teeth and that kind of thing. It can stress a baby severely. So a bag of candy is just not appropriate for that reason. It can be really dangerous to the baby. So do your best. Fluids, talk a little bit about fluids. A quart of fluid per 50 pounds of body weight. So that means that through your pregnancy, you're going to naturally require more fluid because you will gain weight. It doesn't include milk and juices. In fact, juices in general would be probably best left out of a diet, except in rare circumstances. So we're talking about water and pregnancy tea, herbal tea if you do that maybe, and maybe an electrolyte replacer, just depending on you and where you live and what season it is. That can feel really good. There are recipes for those online you can make yourself, and then there are other ones you can buy, such as Emergency even the electrolyte water that they sell. And that can make the difference in how you feel, for sure, when pregnant and not. So don't forget fluids. All the great food in the world isn't going to do you as much good if you're dehydrated. And being dehydrated definitely can cause complications in pregnancy on its own. So you can eat great and dehydrate yourself while you live in the desert and wind up in preterm labor. And that is the truth. So fluids are a great thing to get in the habit of drinking. You can measure them out for yourself at the beginning of a day, and many women I have found find that helpful because then they can see what they're drinking and they know by the end of the day if they really have gotten enough, because it can be hard to tell. You think you have, but you haven't, or vice versa. So finally, just a few words about supplements. We can't possibly talk about every supplement or, why they would be appropriate or when they wouldn't be. I think for simplicity's sake, it's best to say that let's focus on food first, for sure. For healthy women, even prenatal vitamins have not been shown in studies to have a great effect. So, I don't believe they're necessary, personally. However, should you feel called to take a prenatal vitamin just because it feels right, then you should. And the only requirement that I can think of with those is that they're made from whole foods. Good examples would be New Chapter, which I believe is non-GMO. Rainbow Light is another popular one. I'm not sure about the GMO status of that one, but both are considered whole food vitamins, which means they're supposedly made from whole foods and don't include a whole lot of other chemicals. They may also, and they do, include some helpful herbs and other things like probiotics. So that's really left up to you, but food should be your first line of defense, for sure. There are supplements, most definitely, that have been shown to really help women in pregnancy. And again, we can't go into all of them, but calcium, for one, has been shown to help prevent preeclampsia and reduce blood pressure. So while calcium sources of foods are really great and important, if you are at risk for such things, preeclampsia, or your blood pressure becomes an issue, then maybe a calcium supplement is for you. So there's definitely a place for supplements with the research that we have, on certain conditions. Iron is an important one to mention because a lot of women out there are taking iron supplements during pregnancy. And we're talking pills here, most likely a prescription iron supplement. So these are not harmless. I think that really needs to be communicated. With the prevalence of iron supplements that I see in women that are especially under doctor care, I'm usually just floored. So number one, you would have to be sure you were actually deficient in iron, actually anemic or, needing this. And most women, probably aren't. But that would be the first thing to check out. And then even if you were deficient, it could be argued that food would still be your best source of iron. And that's a whole nother topic too, but you can research iron sources in food and how to get the most iron out of your food, depending on how you cook your food and things like that. So iron pills, not iron from food, but iron pills may put you more at risk for gestational diabetes and preeclampsia. That's been shown in studies. And they've been associated with intrauterine growth retardation, IUGR, so a baby that's not growing appropriately for dates, preterm birth, and small for dates babies. So those things really have been shown, just to kind of balance out that some supplements may be really helpful and prevent complications, but then some are definitely not helpful. So I think we need to look at food for the primary source of our needs, and then we customize for, our own situations, and we make our own choices the best we can, risks and benefits. So that almost covers it. Signs of getting enough. I think sometimes people want to know, well, I think I'm eating well. I think I'm gaining weight appropriately. I mean, how do I know? How do I know if my baby's growing? Well, that's kind of a big topic, but there are a few signs of your body showing you that it's getting enough. Weight gain may be one of them, although again, this is really individual. But the mainstream advice, at least that I've come across, is a recommended 25 to 30 pound gain on average. So again, that may be a lot for you. That may be half of what you should gain during pregnancy. And studies have shown that women with low pre-pregnancy weight and low gain prior to 20 weeks double their rate of preterm birth. So I never forget that fact for some reason, probably because preterm birth definitely freaks me out. And, low pre-pregnancy weight, so somebody that is pretty thin, and then they're really not gaining the first 20 weeks. And there may be what's considered good reason, right? Morning sickness, nausea, vomiting. But it just makes me nervous because the studies really do show that they are at risk for preterm birth. And I guess because I've seen it happen, I wouldn't recommend necessarily weighing somebody, but it's all in how much they're taking in. So if you're being honest with the person that you've chosen to work with, and you as the person that's working with women can be accepting of what women tell you, if people can be as honest as possible, then you can help assess somebody's diet as best you can. And if they start off pregnancy lower on the weight side, then my feeling is they probably need more calories, and you want to see a pretty decent gain before 20 weeks. And that could be a pound a week. It could be more. That's just the difference of starting pregnancy sort of below weight. And even if you're above weight, supposedly, before pregnancy, there still is no specific way to gain. I don't think. I think, again, we have to focus on the quality and then other signs. So as far as weight gain goes, the average is about a pound a week after 20 weeks. So we said before 20 weeks, it's also important that women gain, especially if they were low pre-pregnancy weight. But after 20 weeks, most women, regardless of what they were before pregnancy, should gain about a pound a week. And as they hit maximum blood volume expansion at 28 to 32 weeks, you're normally going to see a pretty good gain there. And that's blood. It's literal blood. That's what the number on the scale is reflecting. So you definitely don't want to see a drop at that point. And again, you may see 2 pounds in a week at that point. And that would be considered a good sign of expanding the blood volume. Feeling good, I think that goes without saying. But that means no nausea at 28 to 32 weeks or after, no beginning vomiting and nausea at that point. That wouldn't be the most healthy sign, although it does happen occasionally, and there's absolutely nothing wrong. But sort of in a general sense, you feel great, you don't feel sick, there's nothing bothering you, hurting you, you're able to eat, you have an appetite, you're just feeling good. This is just a good sign of your body getting enough. Having enough energy, sleeping pretty well. Of course, you're getting up maybe to pee a lot at night. But in general, this point in pregnancy, which is considered mid-pregnancy, is just a time of feeling pretty good for most women. So again, it doesn't mean something's horribly wrong if you don't feel absolutely great and or you have a couple days where you're just not feeling good. But anybody that's really feeling sick and nauseous all the time at this point would maybe tip me off to the nutrition not being quite up to what's being asked for by the body. So that was a mouthful. I hope you got a lot out of that, or at least a little bit that you can pass on and or use yourself. We really appreciate you listening here at Indie Birth, and we ask that you sign up for our podcast, get notification of when we put out a new one, and share this recording, share this information. It is ours to share with you and who you choose. A few sources before we go, as far as the nutrition info for you to look into, would be drbrewerpregnancydiet.com, and that's DR for doctor. You don't spell out doctor. And again, Dr. Brewer is the source for this sort of thinking. You'll find a lot of information on that website, and some you may take and some you may leave, but I think the concepts are good and relatively clear. There's all kinds of information on the internet as far as fermented foods, sprouting, soaking and sprouting grains. For me, that comes from Nourishing Traditions and the Weston Price diet, for one. There's lots of other sources for sure. I wanted to credit Gail Hart again. She has a great book called Research Updates for Midwives. And even if you're not a midwife, you might really enjoy this book. It's full of research about nutrition for one, preterm birth, Group B strep. She has numerous subjects in there that are just out of this world researched and very informative. So if you'd like information on any of those things, please be in touch. We will let you know. Also, we are available here at IndieBirth for consults should you want to discuss something about your pregnancy or have a nutritional session or just have somebody, frankly, to look at a food diary. Maybe you've kept a log for the last week and you just want some feedback on it, and we'd be more than happy to do that for you. So just be in touch with us and we'd be glad to help. Thanks so much. Have a great day.